Today is the 4th of July, or otherwise known as US's Independence Day. Hopefully you're having a good day. I don't really have anything larger to say about that, just hey, yeah, that's today. Unfortunately, in this video, I'm not going to be telling you about Fallout 76's 4th of July event because, unfortunately, it doesn't actually exist. Although in this video, I'll give a little bit of context as to why I think it didn't end up being a thing, but even further and outside of that, Bethesda did share details about the up-and-coming patch or update to Fallout 76, that with patch 11. We get a lot of things like the actual content of it itself, some of the details as to what will be shipping with it, and some of these changes are pretty interesting. We have all that and a few other things as far as Fallout 76 news goes to go over in this video, so if you guys do enjoy, you can leave a like or subscribe. But without further ado, let's first take a look at Fallout 76's patch 11. So one of the first new details we actually learn about patch 11 is that it's kind of getting a delay. Last week we did hear how the patch was going to be coming out in early July, but in this recent update, Bethesda does change that to mid-July because some things need a little bit more time to brew, and frankly, especially with the history of patches and rather patch blunders we've seen with Bethesda, taking additional time to make sure everything is working appropriately on release is definitely okay with me. But with this news, I would have to assume the patch is at least over a week away at this point, or maybe even closer to 2 weeks away, although they still don't give explicit dates. So one of the first fairly massive changes that is on the way is around food and spoilage. Raw food and fluxes, that being those things you find from nuke zones, will last 50% longer before spoiling. And also, your food and drink won't actually lose condition after fast traveling. This is a pretty big change, as many of you guys probably remember, quite a few updates ago, there was seemingly a bug introduced that made it so suddenly food and drink spoiled way faster. There's a couple of theories as to what was going on here, maybe a value change behind the scenes, but also as you were fast traveling around, you noticed that, hey, you would just kind of lose a tick. It was a pretty substantial change, and it was definitely notable, but we never really got a huge response from Bethesda. And over the past few months, that just kind of got integrated as a feature of the game, where food just one day started spoiling much faster. Although with this new update, it seems like that will be no more, and this will probably revert us pretty close to what we saw previously, or at least a bit closer, if not our food even lasting longer than it did originally. Although outside of that, in response to a recent resurgence of interest in this game and people actually starting out in Fallout 76 for the first time, they were changing up the early game for new players, or at the very least new characters. Now while under level 25, it'll cost fewer caps to fast travel about. When you're under level 15, you're going to have a higher disease resistance, but also some of those early game or low level focused challenges will now actually give you survival items or supplies that are useful. I assume this won't affect any of the weekly or daily challenges, but rather like the challenge to place down your camp for the first time. But also is interesting because it's pretty likely that a lot of these challenges will actually lose the items you originally got early on. In Fallout 76, playing through the early game, you get a lot of items just by completing some of these very easy to do things. And then as you get to a higher level and you have a lot of those challenges cleared out, it does become a bit more difficult. I imagine with this new update, that curve will now look a bit different. And I wonder if this is part of the reason Bethesda is choosing to do that. But one of these changes is actually pretty significant. They also mention how they're going to reduce creature difficulty in some of the other regions of Appalachia. So creature difficulty in the Ash Heap, Savage Divide, and Toxic Valley will actually be lowered. They justify this by saying that users who actually leave the forest for the first time will have fewer high-level encounters and will just make it all around a bit easier. But that's a weird change to me. Fallout 76 already has mechanics that when you enter into a new region, some of the enemies that spawn will be more appropriate towards your level. Although obviously with it being a multiplayer game, you might just walk into a region where there are a bunch of high-level enemies because another high level did walk through. But considering a vast majority of the active player base, especially in adventure mode, are high level or very seasoned players that potentially are starting new characters, this seems like a really weird change to me. Even though there definitely are quite a few new players in this game, it seems like a drastic change for what is otherwise a minority of the players. Now naturally, we don't know exactly what this is going to entail. All they say is reduce creature difficulty. Does that mean lowering their levels, changing their stats in those regions, or something else entirely? But definitely is interesting, and although I am pretty happy to see Bethesda making the game nicer and more approachable for lower levels, I'm not sure if this is necessarily the best way to do it when taking into consideration the audience as a whole. And one of those changes that is without a doubt way too late, we actually are getting improved descriptions on legendary items. items. That being that, while actually viewing the legendary item in your inventory, you can see the whole description, everything that weapon is going to do. With Fallout 76, we got the introduction of multiple legendaries on a single item. You could have several stars, seemingly a cap of 5, although you can't currently achieve that, but they never actually built out the system to support viewing all of the legendary effects unless you inspect the item, which just seemed weird and kind of lazy, honestly. Fortunately, now we are finally getting that change. Even further on recipes and plans, they actually are going to tell you what exactly it'll do. So the example here, the buff tats recipe will actually tell you what buff tats will do. That one in particular is really welcome because if you're not super familiar with all of the items, having to actually find out if it's worth learning or buying that recipe could get kind of frustrating. Two very nice quality of life fixes that I'm happy we are getting. But speaking of quality of life fixes, there's also several coming to power armor. You're going to be able to, after this update, use stealth boys in power armor, but even outside of that, you'll now have a toggleable setting for you to use the power armor HUD. So you'll be able to choose whether or not you want the power armor HUD on, or if you just will always use the default HUD. This is useful because the power armor HUD is just really cumbersome, takes up a big chunk of your screen, and although maybe the first couple of weeks Fallout 4 came out, it was cool and unique compared to the rest of the HUD, it got old really quickly. And power armor HUD mods are definitely one of the more popular UI mods for Fallout games. They also mentioned how a variety of power armor bug fixes are also going to be shipping with this patch. And outside of that, they mentioned several other bug fixes. Now when scrapping all junk at a workbench, it won't scrap bulked items, causing you to lose plastic. Punch bowls will be re-implemented and working again with alcohol. The Pioneer Scout challenges are finally getting bug fixes, that looping gunshot sound, and just overall they do describe how this patch is going to have a lot of bug fixes. And I'm pretty hopeful it's going to be one of those patches that gets rid of a lot of those lingering issues that have been persistent over the past few months. Although outside of that, they actually still don't share any details about the future of Fallout 76, notably around DLC. I mentioned in a previous video, but in a recent interview it was described how the vault raids would be coming out late this summer, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're still at least a month away, if not more, considering summer technically doesn't end until September 21st. But with that in mind, what's hopefully going down here is Bethesda is basically trying to get rid of a bunch of bugs, improve the stability of the game itself before getting into the next DLC wave that still may be a ways away, considering we really haven't heard any mention of it in a while now. But I wouldn't be surprised if following patch 11, patch 12 contains some kind of new content, even if it's just for the Battle Royale mode to kind of appease that player base, considering it's almost been a month now and we've had next to nothing outside of some just bug fixes. Although me and many other people were expecting some kind of 4th of July event for Fallout 76. I talked about how Bethesda had been wanting to do another seasonal event and they've been vocal about this in interviews, how in the files of the game there's actually games or events that are already implemented, at least to some degree, that they could have used. And although we did get a ton of cosmetic items around 4th of July, it doesn't seem like any event is happening. And honestly, this isn't that shocking to me. I think come Tuesday, when we didn't get any announcement or any new event, it was almost confirmed in my eyes. One of the big reasons is the 4th of July in the US is a national holiday, so pretty much everyone has off. It wouldn't make sense for Bethesda to drop an event today while you have not a full staff in the office, or at least not anyone wanting to stick around in the office. Heading further, we are still just getting off of E3, which following that, there's typically a bit of a cooldown period. So it's unfortunate. I still think it's kind of odd because of how well it fits in with Fallout, Fallout lore, and just seasonal events in general. A lot of people are taking off this week, and I know me and a lot of you probably would have liked to have played a new limited time event, even if just for the next few days. And one thing I did want to point out that I personally missed, and I imagine some of you guys did, but was pretty cool. Not too long ago, the official Bethesda Game Studios Reddit account actually made a post just saying thank you. They talk a bit about the positive community response, and it was all around just very wholesome, very warm, and Bethesda being thankful of their community. There's no new information or anything along those lines, but it was something that happened that I missed and I did want to point out. But yeah, otherwise that kind of wraps it up, at least for this week. It's pretty interesting where Fallout 76 is right now. I feel like they just came off a huge wave of success. Their E3 presentation was really popular, a lot of people really enjoyed it. It got a lot of people interested in this game again. The Battle Royale mode came out, it had mostly positive reviews, and even people that wouldn't like Battle Royale seemed to be enjoying it. But following that, we got a whole lot of not much. Again, it is understandable. They did have a big push for E3. They have been diligently working hard with their past DLC wave, but at the same time, you would have thought they would have released some stuff to continue that high, to continue the interest, But right now we have an interesting timeline where we don't really know what's next or when. Vault raids, legendary player system, all that's coming, we just don't even know if it's in the next month. Is it 2 months away, 2.5 months away? Also, one thing that I want to make clear I didn't forget about, there are still a lot of banned players that are supposed to get unbanned, or I guess technically suspended players. There's no updates. There's no word from Bethesda. Apparently, once some of those fixes were implemented, people would get unbanned, and that's not really controversial or up in the air. Bethesda said it themselves, they would be unbanning people, and I am still keeping an eye out as to when that's going to be happening. And just one thing, a lot of you guys have been liking some of the recent psych fun facts, and there's just one I thought of while watching a movie yesterday. So a lot of times in movies, they'll whip out some fancy words, and they won't just say amnesia, they'll say retrograde amnesia. I'm sure many of you guys actually know what retrograde amnesia is. It's basically, you know, the kind of typical amnesia, the movie amnesia, where you can't remember the past. Typically, it's depicted by somebody hitting their head, and then you can't remember where they live, or their family, or who other people are. So although that is obviously very terrifying and very scary, and it is a real thing, it has happened to people, there are documented cases, and several of them, and pretty similar to movies, over time, you typically will get your memory back. Although, in real life, some of those real cases, assuming there isn't actual biological damage, the time it takes for you to get your memory back can really vary from a week to there's some instances where people had years where they still couldn't remember everything completely. So that's the one you probably knew about, but there's actually a second type of amnesia, not retrograde, but actually interrograde amnesia. This doesn't get covered often, but to me, this is far more terrifying conceptually. Interrograde amnesia, unlike retrograde amnesia, makes it so you can't actually form new memories. So imagine you hit your head one day and suddenly you no longer had access to long-term memory, which, yeah, that's a real thing. This happens to people. So all the information that enters into your mind will only be there for, let's say, 20 seconds. And then after those 20 seconds go past, you're at a new blank slate. You can remember things previous to the accident because those memories are already established, but you can't form new ones. This is particularly rare and oftentimes associated with a brain lesion or some other kind of biological damage, although there certainly are just psychological causes for this, but those cases are even more rare than the already rare ones. But it's definitely the stuff out of horror movies, some of the lives you see these people live, and just what kind of state they find themselves in. A lot of them actually end up having fairly fulfilling lives working closely with universities as they are studied, so they are provided for and definitely checked on. But yeah, there's your fun fact for the day. There's not just retrograde amnesia, but actually interrograde amnesia also. Either way, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this one. As always, again, I thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this informative or enjoyable. But with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.